Toronto, 2010. A year now etched into the city's memory. What began as another chilly spring evening soon became one of Toronto's most haunting mysteries. Melissa Tran, a 26-year-old graphic designer known for her quiet brilliance and compassion, vanished without a trace after leaving her downtown studio. Her car was found parked near the waterfront, doors locked, phone on the seat, and a sketchbook open to an unfinished design. For years, detectives followed endless leads, chasing shadows through silence and heartbreak. The case grew cold, buried under layers of time and unanswered questions, until a DNA match years later cracked it open once more. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. Toronto in 2010 pulsed with creative energy, coffee shops doubling as art studios, brick-lined alleys painted in vibrant murals, and the low hum of the city that never quite slept. Amid that rhythm lived Melissa Tran, a 26-year-old freelance graphic designer whose quiet brilliance touched nearly everyone she met. Her friends often said she saw beauty in broken things. Whether it was a rusted sign or a cracked sidewalk, Melissa could find art in it. She rented a modest apartment on the east side of the city, not far from where she grew up. Her parents, Vietnamese immigrants, ran a small grocery store in East York, a place filled with the scent of fresh herbs, instant noodles, and laughter from regulars who'd known her since childhood. They often told neighbors how proud they were of their daughter, the first in their family to graduate from university, now chasing her creative dreams. Melissa's life moved at an unhurried pace. Mornings began with coffee and soft indie music playing from her laptop while she refined client designs. Afternoons were spent in Toronto's downtown cafes or meeting clients in converted warehouse studios near Queen Street. Evenings, she'd walk home under flickering streetlights, sketchbook tucked under her arm, documenting the world around her in pencil and watercolor. To her friends, Melissa was reliable, the one who remembered birthdays, who sent encouraging texts at midnight, who showed up with tea when others were heartbroken. She just glowed, one friend would later recall. But behind her soft-spoken calm, Melissa carried quiet worries that she rarely voiced. In early 2010, small, unsettling moments began surfacing. Once she mentioned to a coworker that she thought someone had been watching her from across the street as she closed her studio. Another time, she received late-night messages from an unknown number. Nothing overtly threatening, just strange. Probably spam, she said with a shrug, laughing it off. She even joked about needing to get a bodyguard for walking home so late. No one imagined how those harmless comments would later haunt everyone who knew her. Melissa's apartment reflected her personality, minimalist but warm. A corkboard above her desk overflowed with postcards, sketches, and handwritten quotes. One read, "Keep creating, even when no one's watching." It would later take on a chilling irony. Her circle of friends, mostly fellow artists and designers, often gathered on weekends for small get-togethers, open mics, local exhibits, quiet movie nights. They were planning a birthday dinner for her in late March. She'd been excited about it, texting them ideas about a small rooftop spot overlooking the city. By all accounts, Melissa's life was on the rise. She had recently landed a contract with a boutique clothing brand, her biggest client yet, and was saving up to open her own studio. Her parents couldn't stop talking about it. Everything seemed to be falling into place. But in the days leading up to her disappearance, subtle changes appeared. She grew quieter, distracted during conversations. One friend noticed she had started taking alternate routes home. Another recalled her saying she felt uneasy near the waterfront parking lot she used after work. Still, Melissa never showed fear, just a calm resolve that whatever was bothering her would soon pass. Then came Friday, March 19th. She left her studio around 8:30 p.m., the last to go. Her computer was still on, a cup of tea half finished beside it. She texted a friend, "Heading home. See you tomorrow." That message would be the last time anyone heard from her. Toronto's downtown streets continued buzzing that night, unaware that one of its own had just vanished into the shadows, a mystery that would grip the city for the next decade. What happened on the night Melissa disappeared from Toronto's downtown streets? It was a crisp Friday evening, March 19th, 2010, when everything changed. Toronto pulsed with its usual rhythm, streetcars clattering down Queen Street, the chatter of pedestrians and the glow of neon lights spilling across damp pavement after a brief drizzle. In her small studio on the second floor of a converted warehouse, Melissa Tran packed up her sketchbook and laptop. She had just finished a client mock-up and was eager to get home. At 8:27 p.m., she sent a simple text to her friend. Heading home. See you tomorrow. It was routine, casual, the kind of message that never hints at finality. Surveillance footage from a nearby storefront captured her moments later. A faint silhouette crossing the sidewalk, hair tied back, sketchbook in hand. She looked calm, focused, unaware that the last minutes of her recorded life were ticking away. Her car, a silver hatchback, was parked near the waterfront, a spot she used often. Security cameras near the lot picked up only partial footage. Melissa walking toward the area, then a brief glitch in the recording. When the image returned, she was gone. The car remained, doors locked, keys missing. Inside, police later found her phone, wallet, and the unfinished sketch she had been working on. Nothing appeared stolen. There were no signs of struggle, no broken glass, no footprints in the gravel. At first, Toronto police treated it as a possible voluntary disappearance. Adults go missing every day, they reasoned. Maybe she'd gone off to clear her head. But Melissa's friends and family knew that idea was impossible. She was in the middle of major projects, her parents were expecting her for dinner that weekend, and her rent had just been paid in full. She had roots, responsibilities. She didn't just walk away. By Monday, panic set in. Flyers with her photograph, smiling, holding a paintbrush, were plastered on lampposts, coffee shop windows, and subway entrances. Social media campaigns launched overnight. Her family appeared on local news pleading for information. If anyone has seen her, her father said through tears, please call us. Please bring our daughter home. Despite the public attention, the investigation stumbled. Detectives interviewed co-workers and neighbors but found no witnesses who had seen her leave the lot. Her car had no fingerprints other than her own. The only oddity, a faint smudge on the driver's side door, later deemed inconclusive. As the first week passed, hope turned to dread. The Tran family visited police daily, asking for updates. Behind the scenes, officers quietly admitted they were baffled. There were no ransom calls, no credit card activity, and no evidence of foul play. The city seemed to swallow her whole. Toronto's creative community responded with an outpouring of solidarity. Artists held candlelight vigils outside her studio. Posters reading "Find Melissa" covered walls across downtown. Volunteers searched the lakeshore, ravines, and abandoned lots. But each search ended the same way, empty-handed. Days bled into weeks. Weeks became months. Seasons shifted, but the unanswered question lingered in every corner of the city. Where is Melissa Tran? Her parents kept her apartment exactly as she'd left it. Coffee mug on the counter, sketchbooks stacked neatly by the window. Her mother often sat on the bed at night whispering prayers into the quiet room. By the end of summer, the case had begun to fade from headlines. Another missing person poster lost among dozens. Police quietly scaled back the search, waiting for new evidence that never came. Then, in early August, a jogger cutting through a wooded ravine along Don Valley stopped suddenly. Something on the ground caught his eye, fabric tangled in the undergrowth. When a jogger made a horrifying discovery months later, would Toronto finally learn what really happened to Melissa Tran? 4 months after Melissa Tran vanished, the heat of Toronto's summer began to fade. The city's rhythm had dulled. Even those who didn't know her name could still feel the weight of her disappearance. Flyers, now weathered and torn, fluttered along telephone poles, silent reminders of a young woman who had simply vanished into thin air. Then, on a humid morning in late July 2010, everything changed. A jogger, following a familiar trail through the Don Valley ravine, noticed something half buried in the mud near the tree line. At first, he thought it was garbage, a piece of fabric caught in the undergrowth. But when he stepped closer, his heart froze. What he saw was a torn denim jacket, the sleeve twisted unnaturally, and beneath it, a shape that shouldn't have been there. He called 911 immediately. Within minutes, the area swarmed with officers, crime scene tape slicing through the trees as the hum of cicadas filled the heavy air. Forensic teams in white suits moved methodically, documenting, photographing, preserving. It didn't take long before the grim confirmation came. Human remains. For hours, detectives combed through the ravine, searching for anything, footprints, discarded items, a trail that might explain how Melissa's body ended up there. The area was isolated, shielded by thick brush and steep slopes. Whoever had left her there knew the terrain well. The next day, dental records confirmed what everyone feared. It was Melissa. The news broke across Toronto like a wave of heartbreak. Outside her family's grocery store, candles and flowers lined the sidewalk. Strangers left sketches, photographs, and handwritten notes. The city that once celebrated her art now mourned her silence. Detectives described the discovery as deeply disturbing. The remains showed signs of restraint, but decomposition made it impossible to determine exactly how she died. The medical examiner could not conclude the cause of death, only that she had likely been dead for weeks before being found. There were no obvious signs of assault, no weapon recovered, no clear forensic evidence linking anyone to the scene. Investigators theorized that Melissa may have been held captive for some time before her death. The condition of her clothing, along with the presence of duct tape remnants nearby, suggested she hadn't been killed immediately after her disappearance. That revelation terrified the community. If true, it meant someone had hidden her, possibly close by, all along. Reporters crowded the area, broadcasting live from behind the police tape. The city watched as yellow evidence markers dotted the forest floor. "It's like losing her twice," a friend told one camera crew. "We kept hoping she was alive somewhere. Now we just want to know why." At the police headquarters, investigators faced mounting pressure. Hundreds of tips poured in, but few proved useful. Early speculation pointed toward a stalker or someone from her professional circle. But without physical evidence, they had little to stand on. The single torn jacket, the duct tape residue, and a few soil samples. That was all they had. For Melissa's parents, the confirmation shattered what remained of their hope. When officers arrived at their home to deliver the news, her mother collapsed and her father held her for hours in silence. Later, they issued a short statement through tears. "We just want whoever did this to come forward, please." The city's grief turned to fear. If Melissa, kind and cautious as she was, could be taken and killed without a trace, it meant anyone could. The autopsy hinted at struggle, faint bruising, possible defensive wounds, but still no DNA strong enough to identify a suspect. Each answer raised more questions. Who could commit such a crime and leave so little behind? In the weeks following the discovery of Melissa Tran's body, the Toronto police launched one of the city's largest investigations in recent memory. A command center was established downtown, walls lined with photographs, maps, and timelines. Every officer assigned to the case knew they were racing against fading time and a growing tide of public anger. Detectives began the painstaking process of reconstructing Melissa's final hours. They retraced her movements from that Friday evening in March, from her small design studio near Queen Street West, to the darkened parking lot where she was last seen. Each minute was charted, every conversation recorded, every possible route analyzed. Her coworkers described her as cheerful that day, even joking about weekend plans. One recalled how she left the office late, sketchbook in hand, humming quietly as she packed her things. Security footage confirmed her walking toward the lot at 8:31 p.m., glancing at her phone. That was the last verified image of her alive. Detectives interviewed dozens of people, friends, ex-boyfriends, rideshare drivers, baristas, even fellow artists she had recently collaborated with. Most had nothing to offer beyond shock and sorrow. But one neighbor who lived across from her studio mentioned something strange. A dark sedan had been seen idling near the alley several nights that month. He couldn't describe the driver, and no license plate was ever recorded. Still, it was the first faint lead in a sea of uncertainty. Teams scoured the city for clues. Empty warehouses near the waterfront were searched. Phone records were subpoenaed. revealing no suspicious calls after 8:30 p.m. Even social media messages were analyzed, uncovering a few persistent followers who had commented obsessively on her artwork, none of whom could be tied to her disappearance. Rumors began to swirl. Some claimed it was a jealous ex-boyfriend. Others whispered about a stranger from one of her art exhibits, or a stalker who had admired her murals in Kensington Market. The media latched onto every theory, amplifying speculation and public fear. But each promising lead collapsed under scrutiny. The investigation, once blazing with energy, began to lose momentum. As weeks passed, frustration grew. Journalists accused the police of incompetence. Online forums erupted with conspiracy theories, claiming Melissa's case was being buried. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters demanding transparency. "We just want justice for Melissa," one sign read beneath a flickering candlelight. The Tran family, exhausted but unyielding, continued their public pleas. They appeared on local broadcasts, voices trembling but resolute. "She was our daughter, not a headline," her father said. "Please, if anyone knows something, and say it." Their grief became the emotional core of a city still haunted by unanswered questions. Inside the task force, morale began to fracture. Some officers believed evidence had been mishandled early on. Items from Melissa's car that were never properly logged, surveillance footage overwritten before being reviewed. The original case timeline contained gaps that no one could fully explain. Privately, a few admitted the truth. Somewhere along the line, mistakes had been made, but not everyone was ready to let the case fade. Detective Erin Calloway, newly promoted and known for her quiet determination, requested to join the task force in late 2011. Unlike others, she had followed Melissa's story from the beginning. She began re-examining the files late into the night, convinced that something crucial had been overlooked. "Every case tells a story," she said to a colleague. "We just haven't learned how to listen to this one yet." Still, the months dragged on and the trail grew cold. The tip line went silent. Media coverage waned. The candles from the vigils melted away, leaving only stains of wax on the pavement, symbols of a city beginning to move on. But when the trail went cold, would anyone still care enough to keep searching? By the winter of 2012, 2 long years had passed since the night Melissa Tran vanished into the dark veins of Toronto's downtown streets. What began as one of the city's most heavily publicized murder investigations had dwindled into silence. The newsroom cameras were gone, the vigils had stopped, and the world, except for a few broken hearts, had moved on. Inside the Toronto Police Service, the Melissa Tran case had been reassigned twice. Lead detectives rotated out. Evidence logs were boxed up and filed away in the cold case archives. Aisle 3B, lower shelf. The label was neat and precise. Tran, Melissa, Homicide 2010, the case file, once hundreds of pages thick, was now a relic, dust settling on the edges of forgotten justice. For Melissa's parents, time offered no mercy. Her mother still left the porch light on every night, a ritual she couldn't abandon. Her father visited the small memorial near Don Valley each Sunday, tending flowers as if she might walk down the hill again. Inside their East York home, Melissa's room remained untouched. Sketchbook stacked neatly, her laptop still resting on the desk, the last file she designed titled Reflections. It was as if her life had paused mid-sentence. The Tran family clung to what they could. Birthdays turned into quiet dinners, anniversaries into candlelit silences. Reporters no longer called, but the ache never dulled. They often said grief wasn't like a wound that heals. It was like a season that never changed. Within the department, Detective Erin Calloway refused to let the file fade completely. Though officially reassigned to other cases, she kept a personal copy of the Tran file on her desk. At night, she'd flip through it like a puzzle missing a single cruel piece. There were fibers, unidentified fingerprints, soil samples, each one a whisper from a crime scene that had stopped speaking. "If we can't find the truth," she once said quietly to a colleague, "then the least we can do is preserve it until science can." That idea, the preservation of evidence, became her quiet mission. In 2012, the department's cold case budget was shrinking, and many older files faced destruction. Calloway fought to save Melissa's. Every swab, every hair sample, every unlabeled bag from the ravine scene, She had them cataloged and sealed in climate-controlled storage. Few noticed her effort, but it would later mean everything. Meanwhile, outside official channels, online communities began to fill the void. On Reddit threads and local forums, amateur detectives debated theories late into the night. Some accused the police of covering up internal failures. Others insisted Melissa was one of several victims linked to a potential serial predator stalking Toronto's art districts. None of it led to proof, but it kept her name alive in the corners of the internet long after the city stopped speaking it aloud. Years turned into nearly a decade. New technologies, once experimental, began reshaping forensic science. Touch DNA recovery, mitochondrial testing, genetic genealogy. Yet for the detectives still serving, Melissa's file remained buried under newer crimes. Newer tragedies, but one small action would bridge that lost decade. A memo filed by Detective Calloway in 2012, marked simply, "Retain all biological samples for future analysis. Potential for re-examination with advanced DNA sequencing." At the time it seemed routine, but buried within that sealed envelope was the unexamined piece of fabric recovered from Melissa's jacket, the one that no lab had been able to test with 2010's limited technology. And years later, when a new wave of forensic tools emerged, that forgotten piece would resurface and change everything. What hidden evidence would one lab revisit nearly a decade later? And what truth would it uncover? By 2019, nearly a decade after Melissa Tran's murder, the Toronto Police Service had launched a new initiative, the Cold Case Unit, dedicated to revisiting long-forgotten crimes with the latest forensic science. Among thousands of files stacked inside the department's archives, one slim dust-covered box bore the faded label, Tran, Melissa, homicide, 2010. Inside it lay the same evidence collected all those years ago: photographs, police notes, and a small plastic envelope containing a scrap of fabric torn from the sleeve of Melissa's jacket. It had been tested before twice with no usable DNA recovered. In 2010, labs could only detect strong, full profiles. Anything faint or degraded was dismissed as inconclusive. But technology had evolved. Enter next generation DNA sequencing, NGS, a revolutionary method that could identify genetic material from even a handful of invisible cells. The Cold Case Unit's lead forensic biologist, Dr. Riya Patel, believed Melissa's jacket scrap might still hold secrets buried deep in its fibers. "Every piece of evidence has a voice," she said quietly. "You just need the right tools to hear it." The sample was carefully thawed, prepped, and run through the new sequencer. Days turned into weeks as machines hummed and computers processed data in near silence. Then one morning, an alert flashed across Dr. Patel's monitor. Partial genetic match found. It wasn't a complete DNA profile, only a partial strand, but it was enough to cross-check against CODIS, the National DNA Index. The hit led investigators west to a cross-border database shared between Canada and the U.S. The name attached to that code stunned everyone in the room. Aaron Cole, a 39-year-old man arrested in Vancouver for aggravated assault in 2016. Cole had served short sentences, nothing that would have tied him to homicide. But his record showed something else. In 2010, he'd worked briefly for a construction company, renovating a property just blocks from Melissa's design studio. He had even rented an apartment less than 2 kilometers from where her remains were found. The coincidences were chilling. Detectives reopened every interview, every tip, cross-referencing Cole's employment history, vehicle records, and digital footprints. Surveillance footage from 2010 was long deleted, but archived payrolls and bank statements filled the gaps. Cole's shifts often ended late at night, around the same time Melissa left her studio on March 19th. Still, caution defined the new Cold Case Unit's approach. Partial DNA matches could mislead. Investigators had seen false positives ruin cases before. So before moving forward, they needed confirmation, a full genetic profile, or ideally, a direct familial match. To achieve that, they turned to a controversial but groundbreaking technique: genetic genealogy. By uploading the DNA fragment to open-source databases used for ancestry tracing, analysts searched for relatives who might share segments of Cole's genome. Weeks later, they struck gold: a second cousin in British Columbia, whose public genealogy data helped triangulate the family line directly back to Aaron Cole. It wasn't coincidence anymore. It was science connecting the final dots. When police quietly pulled Cole's 2016 arrest file, they noticed something eerie. The vehicle listed in his report, a dark blue sedan, matched the one described by Melissa's neighbor years ago idling outside her studio. The pattern had come full circle. Detectives felt the air shift. For the first time in 9 years, the Tran case had momentum. The DNA didn't just whisper a name, it shouted it. But even as excitement spread through the unit, doubt lingered. DNA could be transferred indirectly, through contact, objects, or even contamination. Was Cole truly Melissa's killer, or simply another name tangled in forensic noise? The case was poised at the edge of revelation. The next step, surveillance, interviews, and a long-awaited warrant, would determine everything. Could this DNA finally expose the man behind Melissa Tran's murder? Or was it another cruel false lead? It happened quietly, almost without warning, on a gray November morning in 2020. The air in Vancouver was heavy with fog as unmarked police vehicles rolled into a narrow residential lane in East Hastings. The street was still asleep when detectives from the Toronto Cold Case Unit, working alongside local officers, positioned themselves outside a modest apartment building, the kind of place no one looked at twice. Inside apartment 2B lived Daniel Mercer, a 38-year-old construction worker who had lived under the radar for nearly a decade. He was the name behind the DNA match, a man who had for 10 years blended into the noise of ordinary life. At 6:14 a.m., detectives knocked. Mercer opened the door, barefoot and disoriented, a coffee mug in his hand. He barely had time to react before officers stepped forward, badges raised. "Daniel Mercer, you're under arrest for the murder of Melissa Tran." His expression froze, confusion turning to recognition. A flash of something dark flickered across his face. He didn't resist. Inside the apartment, investigators began their search. The rooms were small but meticulously organized, a disturbing contrast to what they found inside. In a worn box beneath the bed were old receipts, photos from Toronto dated around 2010, and a sketchbook filled with illustrations eerily similar to Melissa's own art style. It was as if Mercer had been studying her, mimicking her work, trying to absorb her life. When the lab results returned, the evidence was conclusive. The DNA extracted from Melissa's jacket was a full genetic match to Mercer. The trace found on the inner fabric of her sleeve, once unreadable in 2010, now told the story that her voice never could. Back in Toronto, the news broke like thunder. After 10 years of silence, a name had finally been tied to the murder that had haunted the city's art community. Social media flooded with renewed attention. Justice for Melissa trended again, posts filled with her smiling photos, the same ones that had once hung on missing posters across the city. For her parents, the arrest was both a relief and a heartbreak. Reporters captured them outside their East York home, clinging to each other, tears streaming down their faces. "We always knew," her mother whispered through sobs. "We just needed someone to listen." Detectives held a press conference, their tone restrained but heavy with emotion. "This case represents years of persistence, science, and hope," one officer said. Behind the podium, a photograph of Melissa, bright, young, alive, reminded everyone of the human cost buried beneath the statistics. Yet even in the wake of the arrest, peace didn't come easily. The evidence proved connection, but not motive. Who was Daniel Mercer beyond the file number? Why Melissa? Why then? As journalists began to dig into his past, a portrait of quiet volatility emerged. Former co-workers described Mercer as withdrawn, odd, and fixated on details. He had once worked at a renovation site just 3 blocks from Melissa's studio. He knew the neighborhood well. Police speculated that their paths had crossed, maybe at a cafe, maybe during one of her walks home. Still, speculation could only go so far. The truth, the motive, the reason for it all, would have to be unearthed in court. The city that had once mourned Melissa now waited again, holding its breath. After a decade of silence, the question that lingered in every mind wasn't who anymore. It was why. What would the courtroom reveal about the man accused and the motive behind his crime? The trial of Daniel Mercer opened in early 2022, inside a packed Toronto courtroom brimming with tension and quiet grief. It had been 12 long years since Melissa Tran vanished, yet the pain in that room felt raw, as if time had refused to dull the wound. Every seat was filled. Journalists, artists from her community, old classmates, and strangers who had followed her case for years. At the front sat Melissa's parents, hands clasped tightly together. Her father's gaze never left Mercer, while her mother held a photograph of Melissa against her chest. The air was heavy, charged with the unspoken question. Would justice finally speak for their daughter? Prosecutor Helen McAdams opened with precision. She laid out a meticulous timeline. Melissa leaving her studio at 8:30 p.m., the last text to her friend, the discovery of her locked car near the waterfront. Each detail reconstructed the night of March 19, 2010, piece by piece, like assembling a puzzle that had haunted Toronto for over a decade. The jury listened as the prosecution unveiled forensic evidence. The DNA found on the torn jacket sleeve, once unreadable, now matching Mercer with 99.999% certainty. Digital forensics experts testified that Mercer's old cell phone records placed him near Queen Street that same night. A co-worker recalled him returning late to their job site the following morning, disheveled and unusually quiet. But the defense was relentless. Mercer's attorneys argued contamination, suggesting that the DNA could have been transferred indirectly, perhaps through shared public spaces or cross-handled evidence. They painted Mercer as a hard-working man with a troubled past but no motive for violence. Coincidence does not equal guilt, the defense attorney repeated, and 10 years of silence does not make a man a murderer. Throughout the proceedings, Melissa's family endured every photograph, every clinical detail, with heartbreaking composure. Her brother, who had been a teenager when she disappeared, took the stand briefly. She wasn't just a victim, he said, voice trembling. She was an artist, a sister, someone who made the world brighter. Friends followed. Former classmates, fellow designers, neighbors. They spoke of Melissa's warmth, her laughter, her love for color and life. Each testimony made the courtroom ache with the weight of what had been stolen. The prosecution's closing statement was quiet but devastating. This was not random. It was obsession disguised as chance. Melissa Tran's life was taken by a man who watched, waited, and acted, and then thought he had buried his secret forever. But science does not forget. When the jury withdrew for deliberation, the room sat in silence. Hours passed, then days. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, their breath visible in the cold spring air. Finally, on the third afternoon, the court clerk summoned everyone back. As the foreperson stood, the tension broke into a collective stillness. We, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Mercer, guilty of first-degree murder. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Melissa's mother broke down, clutching her husband's hand. Mercer remained still, face blank, eyes unfocused, as officers led him away in handcuffs. For the first time in 12 years, the Tran family had an answer, but not closure. Outside, cameras flashed in the rain. Supporters embraced, reporters spoke of justice delayed but not denied. The verdict became headline news. Toronto 2010 cold case solved. DNA convicts killer after a decade. And yet, as the city exhaled, one question remained. How does a community heal from something that changed it forever? But even with a verdict, could a community ever truly heal from what it lost? More than a decade after her murder, the case of Melissa Tran has become more than a tragedy. It has become a lesson written into the heart of Toronto itself. Her name is no longer just a headline or a cold case file number. It is spoken in classrooms, displayed in galleries, and remembered every March in the glow of candlelight vigils that line Queen Street, where she once walked with her sketchbook and coffee cup in hand. The legacy of the Tran case reshaped the city's understanding of time, persistence, and justice. After the 2022 conviction of Daniel Mercer, Toronto's cold case unit underwent a transformation. The detectives who had refused to give up, especially those who fought to preserve the smallest fragments of evidence, began mentoring new recruits. Their message was clear. No file is too old, no name too forgotten, no sample too small to matter. Out of that philosophy came something enduring. The Melissa Tran Initiative, a fund supporting the continued testing of unsolved cases using next-generation DNA technology. What began as a tragedy became a catalyst for reform, helping other families find answers once thought lost to history. But Melissa's story also inspired hope outside the realm of law enforcement. Each spring, the Ontario College of Art and Design University, OCADU, awards the Melissa Tran Memorial Scholarship to young designers who embody her creative spirit. Students who, like her, see art as a reflection of human truth. Her friends, now professionals in their fields, helped launch the fund in 2023. The first scholarship recipient described Melissa's legacy as a reminder that beauty, even when silenced, still finds a way to speak. At the Art House Gallery in downtown Toronto, an entire wall now displays Melissa's recovered sketches, digitized, restored and framed in minimalist white borders. The exhibit, titled Echoes of Light, opened to the public 2 years after Mercer's conviction. On its opening night, visitors moved quietly between displays, photographs of Melissa working, newspaper clippings of the case, and excerpts from her journals that hinted at the world she hoped to build. Beneath one drawing, a plaque reads, "For every voice that was taken too soon, may their art, their story, and their truth endure." For Melissa's parents, the years have softened nothing, yet peace has finally found small spaces to breathe. They continue to live in the same East York home, where her bedroom, once frozen in time, has now been turned into a studio. Her mother often paints there not to erase the past but to live with it. "She's finally home," she said softly during the unveiling ceremony at the gallery. For the first time, it feels like the silence isn't empty anymore. The case also changed how the city views its cold cases. Detectives now speak of the Tran standard, a method of meticulous evidence preservation and cross-agency cooperation modeled after the procedures that cracked her case. Across Canada, police departments began re-evaluating their storage of biological samples, ensuring that time could no longer be the enemy of truth. Melissa's story endures not because of the horror of what happened, but because of what followed. The unwavering pursuit of answers, the transformation of grief into action, and the understanding that justice, however delayed, is still justice. And as Toronto continues to grow, her memory remains woven into its streets, murals, and art festivals, a whisper reminding everyone who passes that truth may fade, but it never disappears. What can Melissa's story teach us about time, truth, and the unbreakable pursuit of justice? 30 years after Melissa Tran's birth, and 15 after her tragic death, Toronto finally found justice. What began as an unsolved mystery ended as a testament to perseverance, science, and the human heart's refusal to forget. Melissa's case proved that truth, though buried under years of dust and silence, can still rise through the cracks of time. Thanks to the evolution of DNA technology and the dedication of investigators who never gave up, forgotten fibers became the key that unlocked her story. That same persistence transformed Toronto's approach to cold cases, inspiring new specialized units, improved evidence preservation, and a renewed belief in the power of forensic innovation. Each reform carries Melissa's silent imprint, a reminder that one person's tragedy can lead to countless acts of change. Yet beyond the breakthroughs and headlines, what lingers most is the humanity. Melissa was more than a case file. She was a daughter who loved to paint, a friend who saw light in forgotten corners, a young woman who dreamed of leaving her mark through art. Today, her legacy lives in the scholarships gallery walls and advocacy movements that bear her name. Her story stands as a promise to every family still waiting, that justice delayed is not justice denied. Time can obscure, but it cannot erase truth. If you believe every voice deserves to be heard, every mystery deserves its answer, and every victim deserves justice, share her story. Because justice lives on only when we refuse to forget.